Hey everyone, welcome to the video. In this video, I'm going to try to answer the question of what is an archetype and why is it important. First, I just want to give some context. As a human being, we are always trying to answer the question of how to act. Imagine that your environment consists of what are called affordances, and an affordance is a perceptual action pattern. So right now in front of me is a microphone. This microphone, this object, affords certain patterns of action to me. And what I perceive when I look at the microphone is not necessarily the objective facts about it. I don't really care about its certain dimensions or its thickness or its weight. What I care about is what I can do with it. And right now, I'm talking into it, so it affords speakability. That's one thing. But more basically, it affords something like graspability. So this object is something that I can grasp. And as I look at it as something that enables me to pick it up. So an affordance is something like graspability or sitability. A chair affords sitting, or a cup of water affords drinkability. Given that we exist in an affordance landscape, you can also imagine that there are way more affordances available to you potentially than you can process. So in order to act, you have to prioritize the affordances. You have to ignore some, and then you have to pay attention to others. As we're trying to figure out how to act, we can also note that all of our actions are in relation to a goal. We don't just act randomly. We are creatures that are goal oriented and that we have desires that we are trying to make manifest in reality in our ecological environment of affordances. So to say that we're trying to prioritize our affordances is also the same thing as saying you're trying to prioritize your goals. When I look at a cup of water again, I might want to drink it, but I could also throw it. I could tap it. I could break it if I wanted to. So all of those affordances are there available to me when I'm perceiving the glass, but to perceive it properly so that I can do something with it, I have to ignore all of those other affordances. To prioritize your goals implies a value hierarchy. So to value one goal over another, to prioritize one goal over another, is simply to prefer it, but the word I'm going to use is to value it, to give more attention to it, to devote more energy towards it. So given that we exist in an ecological environment filled with an infinite number of affordances around you of patterns of action or patterns of potential action, you have to organize them, and we organize them using value hierarchies. So the question of how to act in an environment is the same question as what is the proper value hierarchy that you should adopt that filters out irrelevant information about irrelevant affordances around you. In trying to answer that question, one of the theorists that I've stumbled upon through listening to Jordan Peterson is Carl Jung, and he was a Swiss psychiatrist who collaborated with Freud for many years and popularized many ideas such as the persona and the collective unconscious and archetypes. So Jung was trying to answer this question as well. How do you act? What's the proper way of being in the world? What is the proper value hierarchy? And he may have used different words, but that's essentially what he was trying to figure out. One of his methods of trying to understand value hierarchies was analyzing religious and mythological stories. And he did that because he believed that as human beings evolved specific physiological structures, and as we evolved to embody adaptive patterns of action in the world, we would be able to infer the values from those patterns of action as we just watched ourselves. And as we were watching ourselves, as we're learning and as we're imitating, and as our capacities for abstraction increased, not only could we infer adaptive value hierarchies by watching other people, we then could extract out what is common across patterns of adaptation and generate them or represent them using images. And not only could we represent those adaptive patterns of action using images, but then we could also tell stories about those adaptive patterns of action. And so Jung believed that those themes or patterns in stories, in mythologies, in religious narratives, in fundamental dramas about or throughout various cultures, they represented what he called archetypal images or archetypal expressions. And now an archetype is, it's not the image and it's not the narrative itself. An archetype can be defined as a primordial form. And so it's primordial in that it's ancient from an evolutionary perspective, perhaps tens of millions of years old, maybe older than that. But the archetype is the evolutionarily selective pressure that enables the value hierarchy to be adaptive in the first place. And I think it's better to try to explain this using examples. But first, again, I just want to reiterate that the archetypal expressions, the common patterns and motifs and images that we see across many stories, they themselves are not the archetypes. They are symbolic representations that point to the archetype. And again, you can think of the archetype itself as the source of the adaptive value hierarchies. And so let me try to get into some examples that hopefully clarify what all of this potentially means. So one archetype can be thought of as the hero. And the hero is the being that mediates between order and chaos. Order and chaos are also archetypes, commonly represented as the divine masculine and the divine feminine. All three archetypes have positive and negative aspects to them. And so you can think of order as stability and discipline and structure and predictability, but if order gets out of hand, you get totalitarianism and tyranny and a dictatorship, because for order to exist, for something to be predictable, there have to be limits and boundaries that persist in the face of changes. And so for order to exist to a very large degree, there can be no change. And change or chaos or freedom is another archetype that is fundamentally associated and intertwined with order. If order is predictability and stability, then chaos is creativity, it's innovation, it's the dissolution of borders, it's the source of life, but it's also the source of death. The hero is supposed to be the pattern of proper mediation between order and chaos, because you will have certain knowledge structures or certain understandings about the world. And so this enables you a certain level of predictability. But given that the affordance landscape around you is constantly changing, you meet new people, you go to new areas, you go to a new job, what you learned in the past might not always be suitable for your current situation. And so you have to get rid of some of your knowledge structures, or at least loosen up the boundaries, so that way you can let new information come in that you can then utilize to update and adapt and develop. But you also don't want to be too chaotic to where everything's new all the time, because then you have no predictability, and no one likes that either. And so you're supposed to balance order and chaos to the degree that you're trying to imitate and align yourself with the archetypal hero. So here are just two examples. One of the examples that came to my mind is a Goofy movie. It's a great Disney movie. It's something that I grew up watching and still enjoy to this day. And there's a scene in that movie that I want to describe specifically. And so I'm going to talk as if people have watched these movies. There's a scene towards the end of the movie where Max and Goofy are irritated with each other, and they end up driving off a cliff somehow, and they're on this raging river, and they are able to reconcile as they're floating on their car down the river. Prior to this, throughout the movie, Max is a naive kid who's just trying to figure out who he is, and he's trying to get a girl, he's trying to be popular, he's just trying to live a normal life. And then you have Goofy, the father, the symbolic representation of order, who is relatively stuck in his ways, and he's not necessarily open to the new things that Max is talking about. Goofy thinks that there are solutions and things that made him feel better, Goofy, when he was hanging out with his father, and so he thinks he can just apply the same knowledge structures, the same patterns of action to Max and their relationship, and that will make things better. And there are often times throughout the movie, times where Max expresses that this is not good, but Goofy doesn't listen. One of the things that Goofy teaches Max as they are trying to build their relationship is something called the perfect cast. And again, I'm going to try to talk as if I'm talking to people who've watched the movie. And it's a cool dance move essentially, but it's a cool way to try to catch fish. It's a pattern of action and perception that has been passed down through the generations from goof to goof, as Goofy said. And he teaches Max that. He shows it to him one time, and what happens back at that scene later in the movie, as they are navigating down this raging river, is that the river becomes more and more chaotic, and they fall off into a waterfall. And Max is somehow able to save himself because there's some makeshift parachute that rescues him. But Goofy is falling down into the abyss, into the chaotic waters. And one of the things that Max does, well, the thing that Max does is he takes the knowledge, the adaptive pattern of perception and action of the perfect cast that Goofy taught him earlier, and he uses that to save him. And so the pattern there is something like the hero, the son, integrating the knowledge of the past, the ancient wisdom, in order to solve this new problem, because I'm pretty sure no goof before Max has ever had to do something this specific. But he takes the ancient knowledge that helps him get part of the way, and then he integrates it using his own capacities and faculties to save his father. And the movie progresses where once they're saved, Max has essentially integrated this new knowledge, and they're on good terms now. Now Goofy then helps Max, and they work together to solve another problem that was going on, which was Max trying to figure out how he was going to attend this Powerline concert to please this girl that he was talking to. So what's the overall pattern? You have this masculine figure, you have the father, who has knowledge of the past, but isn't necessarily paying attention to what's going on now or the future. And then you have the hero, who is trying to find his way, who is something different. He's not the same thing as the father, but he's nested within that structure, and he's trying to break out of it because he is noticing that there are some elements of the current reality that aren't best solved by the ancient solutions. And what you see at the end is the integration of the father and the son. You see the hero using ancient knowledge to solve a novel problem. And it's something like the hero identifying himself not just as an individual, but also understanding that if he wants to be the best person that he can be, if he wants to transform his personality to be most adaptive, he needs an understanding of certain elements of the ancient wisdom of his ancestors. So that's one expression. That's one idea. That's an archetypal expression of something that has been around for a long time. It's a symbolic representation of adaptive patterns of action, and also it also represents an adaptive value hierarchy. Now let me give you another example, and then hopefully that will make things clearer. How you can see how you can take two archetypal expressions, and again, they aren't the archetypes themselves. They, in their content, in the explicit images that you can see, are pointers to the archetype, which is something more fundamental, which is the overall form and the pattern that they take. The other example I just want to talk about is Lion King. There's a scene after Scar takes over, Mufasa is dead, and Simba is hanging out with Timon and Pumbaa, and they're singing Hakuna Matata. They're basically in this utopian world where they don't have to worry about anything. And Nala finds Simba, wrestles with him, pounces on him, actually pins him, and they have an exchange. And she tells him, hey, the pride is actually messed up. Like, where are you at? We need you to come back and help us out. And Simba's like, no, I think things are good here. And Nala admonishes him, judges him, and then makes Simba self-conscious. He's like, who am I? What am I supposed to be? I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. He then goes on this journey, and he has this initiation ritual with Rafiki. And the scene that I really want to focus on is him looking into the water, looking into the symbolically chaotic water again to see his father. And he looks down. At first he's looking at himself, and then the ripples, with the help of Rafiki, shades into the father, shades into Mufasa. And Simba sees him, and then Mufasa in the water goes away, and then he runs out and he looks up and he's able to get this wisdom from Mufasa. And after that, he seems to be more confident. He seems to have a better understanding that he is not alone and he's just not an individual being that's completely separate from all of the wisdom that has come before him. After that encounter, you could say that he's integrated his father, and then he comes back to the pride, he faces Scar, and he defeats him. And I think there's one scene where Scar is looking at Simba and he actually mistakes him for Mufasa. And so you get this same parallel of the hero who is contending with novel problems that in their specificity have not been dealt with before, but needs help and needs the assistance of the father, of ancient wisdom, of the discipline and order and the patterns of adaptive action that have come from before. But they can't do it themselves. Goofy can't save himself. Mufasa isn't able to save himself. There requires a mediating being that's able to integrate that wisdom and then apply it to the idiosyncratic situation that's going on now and then potentially that's going on in the future. So in my mind, those scenes from Lion King and Goofy Movie are illustrating that same pattern of the hero who integrates the wisdom of the past to deal with the novel issues of the future. So hopefully that makes sense, and hopefully that it illustrates what archetypes are and how they're different from their expressions. But going back to the question at the beginning, the reason that archetypes are important, particularly why archetypal narratives are important, is because if the theory from Jung is correct, then there are deep patterns of wisdom in many of the stories that exist across cultures and that have existed within a specific culture, but let's say for thousands of years. And so to the degree that we want to be better people and that we want to fortify ourselves with the wisdom of our ancestors, it can be very helpful to read many of these stories and to sit with them and to understand them and to break them down and to view them from the experiential perspective of a person who's just trying to figure out how it is that I'm supposed to act and exist and be in this world. So hopefully that made sense. Thank you guys for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.